Verrückt Waterslide. The Verrückt stood 168 feet tall at Schlitterbahn Water Park in Kansas City. It was conceived quickly, pushed to open fast, and named the world's tallest water slide by Guinness World Records in 2014. On August 7, 2016, a 10-year-old boy named Caleb Schwab was riding the slide with two other passengers when the three-person raft went airborne on the second hill and struck a metal support hoop holding up the safety netting. Caleb was fatally injured in the collision. The two women seated behind him suffered serious facial injuries, but survived. Investigators found the slide had been designed without qualified engineers running the fundamental calculations. A later congressional-style investigation revealed the park had received and suppressed reports of riders going airborne, straps failing, and brake problems in the 2 years the slide was operating before Caleb's visit. Schlitterbahn had entered him on a day it was hosting elected officials and their families, and his father was a Kansas state lawmaker. The slide was demolished in 2018. No criminal conviction followed the charges brought against the designers and operations directors, as a judge dismissed the case on procedural grounds related to how evidence was presented to the grand jury. Thunder River Rapids Ride. The Thunder River Rapids Ride at Dreamworld was marketed as a tame family attraction, open to children as young as 2. On October 25, 2016, 6 people were on the ride when one of its 2 large water pumps failed, causing the water level to drop suddenly and leaving a raft stranded on the conveyor belt near the unloading area. A second raft, carrying 6 passengers, including 4 adults and 2 children aged 10 and 12, arrived about a minute later and collided with the stationary raft. Kate Goodchild and Luke Dorset, who were siblings, were thrown from the raft onto the conveyor belt mechanism. Rusbe Aragi and Cindy Lowe were caught inside the ride's machinery. The 2 children were thrown clear and survived. A coronial inquest later found that the pump had actually failed twice earlier that same day, but electricians had not attended the second failure because they were occupied elsewhere in the park. A previous almost identical collision had occurred on the same ride in 2014 without passenger injuries, and the operator at the time was dismissed. Dreamworld's parent company, Ardent Leisure, pleaded guilty to breaching safety laws and was fined 3.6 million Australian dollars, close to the maximum the court could impose. The ride was never reopened. The Smiler. The Smiler at Alton Towers, which holds the world record for the most inversions on a roller coaster at 14, opened in 2013 and was promoted as the park's most extreme attraction. On June 2nd, 2015, a carriage carrying 16 people collided with an empty, stationary carriage that had come to a stop partway along the track. The ride's control system had halted the empty carriage for a reason. Staff misread the shutdown message, decided it was a software glitch, and manually overrode the safety system to restart the loaded train. Vicky Balch, age 20, underwent 6 rounds of surgery before surgeons were forced to amputate her leg. Leah Washington, who was just 17 at the time, also lost a leg. Her boyfriend Joe Pugh, 18, shattered both knees. Daniel Thorpe, 27, suffered a collapsed lung. Shonda Chauhan, 49, required surgery for internal injuries. The passengers in the front row bore the full force of the impact, trapped about 25 feet above the ground for up to 4.5 hours, while emergency services worked to bring them down. At sentencing, the judge described the crash as a needless and avoidable accident, and specifically rejected the park's initial claim that it was caused by human error, ruling instead that the fault lay in the absence of a proper system for managing safety decisions. Merlin Attractions was fined £5 million. The Smiler reopened in 2016 with updated safety protocols. The Haunted Castle. Six Flags Great Adventure was one of the most popular theme parks on the East Coast. On the evening of May 11th, 1984, a group of 9 teenagers entered its Haunted Castle attraction together. The Haunted Castle was a walk-through horror attraction built from 17 connected semi-trailers, arranged in an H shape, with a medieval facade on the outside. The interior was lined with plywood, foam padding, wood partitions, and flammable fabric decorations. There were no sprinklers and no smoke alarms. Just after 6:30 p.m., a teenager inside the dark attraction used a cigarette lighter to see his way through a pitch-black corridor. According to court testimony, the lighter made contact with one of the foam wall pads. Within minutes, the entire structure was engulfed. Most of the roughly 30 people inside that night escaped when they saw the smoke, but some initially assumed it was part of the attraction's effects. The 9 teenagers who had entered together became trapped. 8 of them, all between the ages of 15 and 19, died from smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning. They were found within 25 feet of a fire exit. The park's owners were indicted on aggravated manslaughter charges, with prosecutors arguing that management had repeatedly ignored safety warnings about the lack of sprinklers, fire-resistant materials, and sufficient exits. After an 8-week trial, the company was acquitted. However, each of the 8 families settled a civil lawsuit for $2.5 million. The disaster led to sweeping national changes in how temporary attractions at theme parks are inspected and regulated. The Ghost Train. Luna Park in Sydney is one of Australia's most recognizable landmarks, with its famous giant smiling face entrance. On June 9, 1979, it became the site of the country's worst theme park disaster. That night, a ghost train ride, a slow, indoor dark ride, running through a series of spooky scenes, caught fire while it was in operation. 6 children and 1 adult were not survived when the ride's cars became engulfed in flames. Survivors described the fire spreading with extraordinary speed through a structure built largely from flammable materials, with no sprinkler system in place. The cause of the fire was never definitively established. The official investigation ruled it an accident, but questions about the fire's origin persisted for decades. In 1995, a New South Wales coronial inquest re-examined the case, but again could not reach a definitive conclusion. Luna Park was closed for a period following the disaster and later reopened in a rebuilt form. The ghost train ride was never reinstated. The Mindbender Derailment. Inside West Edmonton Mall, once the largest shopping center on Earth, stood the Mindbender, the world's biggest indoor triple-loop roller coaster. On the evening of June 14, 1986, that legend turned tragic. As the yellow train roared through its second loop and climbed toward the third, the rear car suddenly began to shake violently. Riders described feeling repeated bangs traveling down the train with no idea what was happening. Moments later, the last car jumped the track, entirely flying off at roughly 100 kilometers per hour and slamming into a concrete support pillar. 3 passengers lost their lives. A 4th, the sole survivor in that car, suffered catastrophic injuries that would affect him for decades. The investigation revealed a chilling cause. 4 bolts on the wheel assembly had worked themselves loose over repeated cycles of use, eventually letting the wheel assembly separate from the track entirely. A provincial inquiry ultimately pointed to design and manufacturing flaws from the ride's now defunct German manufacturer. The Mindbender stayed closed for more than a year while safety systems were overhauled, then reopened and continued thrilling riders for decades. The ride was finally retired and dismantled in 2023, closing the chapter on one of Canada's most infamous amusement park accidents. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button, it genuinely helps. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you next time.